I feel like I'm in a press conference. Okay. Bridgett.
Hello.
Cool. I have a question for you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. You know, I have this theory about cinematic heirlooms. That there are films that we treasure because they speak to us, and we pass them around from generation to generation. And Naked Acts has really become a cinematic heirloom because of this timelessness quality that it has. It can, you know, you see this film that's almost 30 years old, and it speaks to you.
Thank you.
So my question is, how did you get the impetus for this film, and would you also consider it a cinematic heirloom?
That's a great question. I love that term, cinematic heirloom. I'd like to claim it if I could. Am I getting feedback? So many things go into why you make a film, right? I think that if I had to really narrow it down, I would say that I was trying to answer a question that I had for myself. And in making this film, writing the script was a way for me to work out what I was feeling. As at the time, a young Black woman sort of coming into my own sexual identity and trying to understand what role history played in that. Like, how much of it was my own experience, how much of it was the baggage of who I was because of who we are as Black women in the world. I was just wrestling with all of that. And writing is my way of trying to figure things out. But also, honestly, I really absolutely loved Bridgett Davis and All About Eve. And I always thought, wow, that film is so special to me because it captures an inside look at a particular world of artists who are trying to really create something powerful despite all of the sort of drama that takes place, right? And I thought, Black folks do that too. And it would be really a wonderful thing if I could replicate that kind of sense of passion and commitment and craziness too, but this group of individuals trying to make something happen and build community. I wanted to see that in the world existing in that way. So is it an heirloom? I don't know.
It is.
It's mine. It's my heirloom. So yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned the word community because I remember seeing this film in the early 2000s and teaching it a couple of times, but haven't really watched it in 20 years for myself.
Right.
And when I saw it last week, one of the things that I was thinking about was the setting of Brooklyn in the 90s and all of those artists. I just read, really thumbing through the book that we have, you mentioned Cade, and just thinking about Renee Cox at that time, her being in this film, thinking about Essence Magazine, just sort of what all of that meant at that moment.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you, what inspired you to attempt to make a film? Because you hadn't studied as a filmmaker. So what made you go, I can do that? Or what made you go, I have to do that?
Yeah. What made me think I could do that? I often ask myself that, what gave me the gumption? I often say that it kind of started with my friends and I sitting around at the time, really admiring what Spike Lee had created because he was so in his prime and, all these films of his were out in the ether. This was the early 90s. But we would also honestly complain a little bit about his portrayal of women. And after a while, maybe one too many cocktail parties, sort of coming up with this same critique, someone literally said to me, well, if you don't like his depictions, you should make your own films. And the person said it to me in a really flip way, but they didn't know me. Because I heard him say that, and I was like, you know what? Actually, he's right. Why am I expecting this Black man to depict Black women in a way that speaks to me if that's not his lived experience. And maybe the problem really is that we're expecting that from someone instead of seeing more depictions by Black women filmmakers. And I had gone to see Daughters of the Dust. I had sat in the last seat available in the front row at Film Forum, and I watched the whole film like this. And it changed me. And I realized in that moment, oh, that's a possibility I'm looking at. So, you know what? If someone else has done it, maybe it's possible for me to do it. And so I did get some training. I went to this wonderful community-based organization, Third World Newsreel in New York, where their whole mission is to put production in the hands of people who wouldn't normally have that access. And so for less than a year and very little money, I learned how to make film. And that's really what it was. It sort of built from there, you know. I thought, oh, this is possible. Do I have a story to tell? The script started coming together. Oh, maybe I can actually do this. And so the next thing I knew, I was on my very first film set, which was mine. So, yeah.
Wow.
You know, something I think of all the time is this idea when people engage with Black films now that they first, or not first, but sometimes the first instinct is to think, I don't want to watch things that are dramatic. I don't want to engage with dramatic topics.
Yeah.
But I think something that's really special about Naked Acts is that it deals with the darkness of light, but in the sense of Frankie Beverly and Maze's joy and pain.
Thank you for that.
You cannot have joy
Yeah.
without pain, and pain without
Yeah.
joy. So I just want to ask you, how did you work through balancing the lightness and darkness in those early days of the script? Because it really comes across as something that you really wrestled with and were able to still give light and life to these characters beyond, you know, the darkness of their circumstances.
I love that question, thank you. One of the things that has always been a pet peeve for me is that I feel, or I certainly felt back then, that when I would watch films that had Black characters in them, they seemed to drop from the sky. They had no context, they had no parents, you didn't know where they came from or how they got to be who they were. And so some of what I kept trying to do in the process of writing the script, which by the way, I wrote so many drafts. I used to know the exact number and I'm forgotten now, a lot. I was really trying to give each character, particularly Cicely, a layered life. And for her to really have come from somewhere so that she's who she is because of a lot of different factors. And so the sexual abuse was one of the things that happened in her life. And yes, it was the sort of driving force behind all of her issues around exposing herself and revealing who she really was. But I just thought, if I can depict her in a well sort of rounded way in that she has relationships with all of these different people in different ways, then you will see her as a full person. And so the other issue for me was to really, I believe in taking care of the audience in a way, if you know what I mean. It didn't feel right to leave the audience at a certain emotional point. So I thought a lot about, in writing the script, where do I take the audience once I leave that climatic moment of her revealing this thing to her mom. And on the set, we talked about it a lot too. Like, how do we move the story in a way so that we leave the audience in the right moment? Because that's felt like a responsibility, and it felt like an important kind of caretaking, you know. Yeah. This is so funny to me. And then I'll turn this way.
I wanted to ask you about how you decided on the video store as a character and a setting in this film. I think we talked a little bit about, like, it'd be a really interesting series about films from the 90s set in video stores, but what made you settle on that?
Well, you know, it was on one hand just a real community center, like that video store where the film where those scenes are shot really was my video store in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And I was saying this to someone the other day. They were hubs, video stores, you know. You would hang out in a video store. And people would come by and they'd talk about the films they were seeing, but it was always a way to connect with folks in the neighborhood too. And so it had that kind of feel for me. I felt as though it was a good sort of shorthand for not only the dramatic moments of the story, you know, this is where her mother now owns a video store, this woman who used to be in these films that are now in the store. I like all of those kinds of meta kind of sort of resonances, but also it felt like a kind of base, you know, like there was a way in which it was a kind of home, right? And so I really wanted to anchor and frame the story that way so that you start there and then it's familiar to you too when she comes back to it, that it was ironically, despite what she had to do, what she had to reveal to her mother in that space, I wanted it to feel like a kind of safe space. And that's how video stores were. They were like safe spaces. I don't know, how many of you even remember video stores? Oh, good, okay. Yeah, so, yeah, and then, yeah, I just felt like it made sense in terms of where to place that action as I was trying to capture this very quick way of saying this is a kind of home that she's returning to.
I'll just ask this question, mix things up a bit. How much did Cicely's character change in all of your drafts? I'm curious if you knew that you were going to write about a family of actors from the grandmother to the granddaughter, and yeah, what did Cicely start out as, and to what we get on the screen?
Yeah, I love that question too. I think for me it was really about allowing myself to discover who Cicely was, because that was the whole impetus as I began the script. I came to screenwriting after being a frustrated novelist. I did return to novels, but at the time I was trying to write a novel. It really wasn't working. I shoved it in a drawer. I thought, let me try another type of writing, so I tried screenwriting. And yet what I brought along with me was the way in which I would start a piece of fiction with a question. So I did the same thing for the script. I thought, what if Dorothy Dandridge had a daughter, and her daughter was Pam Grier? Who would her daughter be? And that really set me off on this whole path, because I thought she'd be of another generation. She wouldn't be like her mother, but she'd have some of her mother in her, but would she have more of her grandmother in her? And then there you go. And so I think Cicely didn't change so much as I got to know her better and better, and she really evolved. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I watched the film again last week, so this is probably my 6th time.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
No, I'm so thankful.
Okay.
And I think, you know, for some people, grief is something they hold on to for a week, maybe a month, but then there are those people who grief is the lens in which they see the world. And I think what I really want to ask you, what advice do you have to artists, to filmmakers, on how to use art as a tool to navigate grief?
Well, that's an ongoing topic for me, because I know a lot, unfortunately, about grief, and I use my writing in some ways to save my life, and in other ways to process that grief. And I guess I don't really have advice. I can just share that for me, it's just about being brave enough to show up to the page every day and work through it, sit with it. I will say it transforms when you can put it out there.
Yes.
It's no longer the thing you're carrying in your chest against your heart. And the other thing that is a surprising bonus is that I find grappling with grief on the page requires that you live with that person you've lost, or that heartache that's really caused the grief in your life. You live with that in a new way, and for me it's like almost strangely pleasurable to have that experience in a new way. Certainly I'm thinking about people I've lost, and having a new relationship with them as I write about them and get to know them in ways I hadn't even known them before. So, yeah, it's magical, even though it can be difficult. I think for me, it's just therapeutic, you know. Yeah.
This is going to be funny every time.
I know.
So you mentioned Spike Lee and Daughters of the Dust, but were there any other films in particular for the framing of naked acts that were inspiration to you?
Well, I mentioned, I wasn't joking about All About Eve. If you look closely, the narrator in All About Eve is this film critic, Addison DeWitt. And he was a good model for Marcel in my film. I thought, who's the truth speaker here?
Yes.
Yeah, so in some ways I really did draw from that whole way, and the beautiful, incredible writing that is All About Eve. But I'm smiling, but I'll just tell the truth. I was thinking a lot about Hollywood Shuffle. I was. And about the ways in which a filmmaker could speak to an industry in a humorous but completely honest way, to say the things that weren't being said, right? And so that was a big influence over me. And then I was watching Cinema Paradiso a lot, because it's just a film about people who love film. And I realized Naked Acts is about many things, but it's also about filmmaking. And so probably I'm thinking that whole 90s, kind of mindset I was in. I think those were the films that were really top of mind. Although I was, consuming a lot of films, but I think maybe if I had to narrow it down, those were the ones. Yeah.
Okay, so Naked Acts had a life, as you mentioned in your intro, and it was a rich life.
Yeah.
And you were carrying your film can to film can, from festival to festival. And you really, never imagined this moment, but you also know so much more about yourself and the world now. How is Naked Acts representing itself to you in this moment?
I'm just blown away that it's still relevant, that people are still engaging with it, that people say to me it feels timeless. And I mean, there are moments when I'm like, was it that the fashion is still applicable today? Even I'm not sure what makes it feel not so dated. Even the look of it, I'm so proud of that. I'm not sure what the magic sauce is that made it that way.
You are the magic sauce.
Oh, okay. I'll take that. I'll share, I think I've shared with this with you, Maya, but we were fortunate to just have the film shown at the Rotterdam International Film Festival, thanks in large part to these amazing two people sitting here, Dennis and Amy of Milestone Films, that made that happen for me. So thank you. That was like beyond what I could have imagined for the film at this point. But while I was there, I was interviewed by this amazing young filmmaker, and he said something very moving. He said, I am recently trans, and I watched the film with my friend who is a trans woman. And he said, we found so much of it relevant to our lives, to what we're experiencing. He said to me, having lived as a woman for most of my life, I could connect around the whole issues around what women are expected to do and be with their bodies. He's like, and then he said the most touching thing. He was like, and it made me think about how I want to be a man in the world. And I said to him, honestly, in 1994, I was only thinking in binary ways, but I'm so thrilled that you are finding resonance in it today. And I just thought, that is the power of when you get it right, when you think you've created something that you could call art, that it just lives on and it creates value in ways that go beyond what you were originally intending. And I had to almost interrupt the interview to hug him at that moment, because I really think that's what it was all about for me. I think that's why I did all this. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Feels like a perfect moment.
We will take it to the audience. Jesse's going to come around with a mic. If you have a question, just raise your hand and he'll see you.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
I just want to say thank you so much for this body of work. I was just reading your interview while also hearing you, and I was really drawn, as a filmmaker right now trying to raise money to make a film, I was really drawn to your process of how you were able to make the film. Everyone should read about it in this stellar book. But yeah, in short, it said that you raised about $350K to make it, and it would have been cheaper now if you hadn't used analog because of the film stock.
Yeah.
And also you were talking about just like, yeah, just the film industry things, people saying like, this person will never get it done, like don't trust this person to make it. To also referring to your sound recordist who was a student of Kathleen Collins, losing ground, and also like your relationship to Daughters of the Dust. And it just makes me think about like, in the legacies of Black cineasts, like cinephiles and filmmakers, we're constantly in conversation with each other.
That's right.
Either through the themes that we explore in our work or the ways that we produce our work, that is sometimes like not shared out loud. And so I just want to applaud you for continuing with your first feature, which not a lot of Black folks, Black women, Black filmmakers get to do. And then also I just, on your ingenuity of like carrying, you said you would carry around a packet that you would give out to folks. Can you share more about that? Just thinking about like how do you market and talk about yourself and your work and your worth and your values?
I could share that anecdote. This is really what happened. At the suggestion of my husband, who is like Mr. Marketing, he was like, just carry your packet everywhere with you, wherever we go. Because at that point I hadn't raised the money yet. I wanted to do the film, but I did put together with his help an amazing packet. And this really happened. We were at a Michelle and Cello concert, and Greg Tate, whom you mentioned, came up to me, and I'm like trying to make this film. I told everyone I saw I'm trying to really raise money for this film. He said, you should talk to my manager. So I did, and she said, I know 2 women who might be interested in supporting you, and give me that packet. I'm gonna send it. You got another one? I'm like, I do. I'm gonna send them both to those 2 women. And one of those women was Alice Walker, who was very supportive, but didn't ultimately invest. And the other woman was Alice's good friend, who also happened to be a Spelmanite, as I am, an alum of Spelman College. And that's the woman who got the packet in her hands out in California. It was sent to her there, and reached out to me and said, you're telling my story and I want to support you. And ultimately became the executive director of the film. The executive producer of the film. And that big budget that for me was like so much money, she provided 2/3 of it because she just believed in the strength of the project. So I tell young filmmakers or any creatives out there trying to make something happen, tell everybody, be prepared, and try to just be ready for the moment when you connect with the person who sees and understands and supports your vision. Yeah. Hi.
So when you created the character of the woman who played Lakeisha, like you were talking about how early a lot of Black women, they just come falling out of the sky, and here came this woman who's like a strong, like big, sexually confident woman who sits on a desk just to like see how like beautiful and attractive she is. How did you create a person who had like no background, was very little in the movie, but keep her still as important as she was as the other characters in this film?
Yeah, I feel that you have to really respect all your characters and you have to really understand them and believe in them. I have a little bit of myself in every of those characters, every one of them. And I also I felt like I understood all of them. And I thought, these are all different parts of Black women that I know, that you just so seldom see on the screen. I do think no matter how short the screen time, or how little backstory you know about them, I think you can convey, as the creator of these characters, respect for them, if you have that respect, right? And that's what I tried to do with all of the characters. And I really liked Randy. And I loved creating a character who really liked herself, which I felt was an important balance for Cicely, who was so filled with self-doubt and, sort of this on her own journey of accepting herself. So, yeah, Randy was an important balance to that, right? Yeah.
Okay, everyone said this was a great film.
Thank you.
It really was amazing. Like Cece's emotions, her actions, it felt like an accumulation of everything that happened in her life. And I know you said you wrote so many drafts for this. How long did it take you until you were like, okay, I'm gonna shoot the script now? Like, did this take like, I felt like, was this like years? Was this just off the dome? Like,
Not off the dome. Now I remember the number, it was 14 drafts. Yeah, it was 14 drafts across 2.5 years. I mean, and I remember really sharing the script with the cinematographer and getting his feedback and sharing it with Jake Ann Jones. I wrote that part for her. And so when she said yes, fortunately for me, she was also, still is, an incredible writer. And so I respected her feedback and made sure that with her input, that the script was as strong as it could possibly be. It was in that way, a real collaborative process. I mean, I did my work. I made sure before I approached any of them and asked them to take on this project with me, it was a big ask because we didn't have money, to pay people. It was a big leap of faith. They didn't really know me, or I didn't have a track record. I mean, really. I don't know if I would have said yes to me. But I knew that if I had written something they really admired, that would be my strength. And so I didn't show anyone until it was as strong as I could make it. And then I did accept feedback. So, yeah, it's not quick, yeah. Hi.
I really love the visual language in the film. And so you talked about the fact that this film is about filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously it's a part that's then making the film, but then you also show Lydia Love's movie, you show that home movie with her and her father.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm particularly curious about having created that visual language, especially because you were coming from being a novelist.
Yeah.
So how did that work for you?
How did it work? Like, how did I come up with it?
Yes. How did you create the visual language in the film?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I was that conscious. I just knew that I knew what I liked. I knew what I liked seeing. I have always loved, for instance, films within films. I like the idea of different textures of film. That's why we literally shot that one home movie on Super 8. Is it called Super 8? Yeah, we shot that on Super 8 with Rob's little Super 8 camera. And because I feel like there's a way in which I wanted the film to evoke emotion through its different textures. And so, even though I don't think I was completely successful all the time, that's what I was aiming for. And so the whole movie does that. The film scene without sound, I wanted it to do that as without, just music, without dialogue. I wanted it to do that as well. I think I was just calling on all the things that really spoke to me and moved me about filmmaking, about films themselves, this art form that I love. So I think had I been able to make a second film right away, I would have started talking about my film language. But I think at that point I was just trying different things. Sometimes I look at it and I think, there's a lot of different styles happening here. But I was trying things, so, yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
First of all, love the film.
Thank you.
My mom's name is Winsome.
Oh.
So every time I heard her name, I got giddy.
Oh.
And Renee Cox, I believe that's her name.
Mm-hmm.
She is originally Jamaican. So
Yes.
am I.
Oh.
So double points on that. That was double. My question is about two scenes. And I wanted to understand your approach to them and why you did that. So the first scene was when Cicely walks into Diane's studio for the first time to do her headshot, and she sees these images of women, and her only way of seeing them is nakedness in the way of what her mom did and not in the way of empowerment. So that's the first part. And the second scene is the homeboy scene. So you could have used a construction worker, you could have used, a guy working on a hot dog cart or whatever, but you chose to have a homeboy with a 40-ounce sticking out the top of the car, super 90s imagery. What was the motivation, or what was the intention behind those two scenes?
Well, the last scene I'll start with, it was the 90s. And the beauty of being able to take the means of production in your own hands is to be able to comment on what you've experienced and has always bothered you. And I was like so many other women, millions, I'm sure, who couldn't walk down a street in Brooklyn or wherever and not have someone say something. From their car, from the street, from the sidewalk. And here was my opportunity to really speak to that. So that's what that came out of. Came out of personal experience, my friends' experiences, and that moment we were in. We were in that kind of moment in the 90s, so that's where that scene comes from. And I think the scene with Cece struggling with those images of those women was a way to say, we as Black women aren't even used to seeing our bodies presented in ways that are, powerful, beautiful, naked, yes, and also sort of having agency as opposed to being just objects. I think that felt powerful and progressive, and I wanted to really showcase an artist who understood that and was doing that with her work for Black women. So that's what that scene was about. Cece wasn't ready yet. She had to get through more of the film before she could appreciate those images. Yeah.
I'm really excited I finally got to see this film because I missed it in the late 2000s. This Real Sisters screened it, and I was like stuck at work and I couldn't make it. I've been chasing it ever since. So very excited to see it tonight. I have a casting question. One, I'm very excited to see John Cephas Jones pop up on the screen. But I wanted to know, Renee Cox, we know her as an artist, and I've never seen her as an actress. So just wanted to hear more about the casting decision and what it was like working with her in that capacity.
Right. So quickly with Ron Cephas Jones, may he rest in peace. He came to me through Jake Ann Jones, who actually did most of the casting for the film. She was part of a downtown sort of stage and alternative performance community, and she knew a lot of talented actors who weren't quote unquote film actors. And so she brought a lot of them in for me to audition, and Ron was one of them. By the way, he has said to me that that was the one time he was cast as a leading man in his whole career. And so I'm really proud that I was able to showcase him in that way. I don't understand why he wasn't cast all the time. Because to me, he was beautiful, you know, and really wonderful in the role. Very quickly with Renee Cox, this is a true story. I met her at a film conference at NYU while I was working on the script, you know, months before I started to shoot. And I said to her, yeah, I have this character and she takes nude she takes nude photos of black women, but I don't know anyone like that. And she said to me, I thought that's what I do. I'm like, oh, really? And so I went to her studio, I saw her work, I couldn't believe it was amazing. And then when I started casting, she was in my head. And I could not find Diana, the character. And then I finally realized it was because I kept thinking about Renee Cox. So I just went to her and asked her, will you actually play Diana? And she's like, I've never acted in a film. And I said, it's okay, just be you. And that's what happened. Yeah. Which I was really proud of her, you know, to have never acted before, to pull that off, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Our 3 guests, this was amazing. Our friends, Wicked Acts opening, it's a band coming right next week. Oh, June.
Not yet, Jesse.
June, and if you love the film, if you have any ideas, please write reviews on Letterboxd.
Letterboxd, yeah.
We need more voices.
Yes, please leave your comments on Letterboxd.